So recently, I was browsing eBay looking at absolute garbage when I came across a Pokemon game that claims that it has every single shiny Pokemon on it. For those of you that don't know, Pokemon's a game where a 10-year-old gets kicked out of their house and goes on an adventure. The main objective of the game is to beat up and catch wild animals and make them fight, even though you could easily use them to murder somebody. But it's all good, because it's for science. These animals are called Pokemon, and you need to capture them to complete the Pokemon encyclopedia known as the Pokedex, which is given to you by Professor. So you're basically just working as the professor's unpaid intern. Professor Oak, you cheap bastard. Using the Pokemon that you catch, the goal of the game is to become the world's greatest trainer by defeating an elite group of trainers known as the Pokemon League. To get there, the 10-year-old kid goes through unlit caves, abandoned buildings, power stations, and even through a hostage situation by an extensive criminal network where no kid should ever be. Seriously, there's like 15 police officers in the entire region, and most of them just sit in one spot all day. Do they even have a real government in the Pokemon world? Because they don't even have any real infrastructure. To get to another town from Cerulean City, you straight up just walk through a hole in someone's house that just never gets repaired. Does everyone in town just do this? Oh wait, I almost forgot. They could also cut down this tree over here that just magically grows back every single time. I'm getting sort of off topic now, but I'll save that all for another video. Every once in a while, a wild or received Pokemon will be a different color than usual. These Pokemon are referred to as shiny Pokemon, and there's a 1 in 8,192 chance of finding one. These shiny Pokemon are very sought after. If you look on YouTube, you'll find thousands of videos of people spending hours looking for them. So, since my channel is now dedicated to overanalyzing useless information, I decided to calculate how long it would take to catch every original shiny Pokemon, or at least find the minimum amount it would take just to see how hard it would be to catch every shiny Pokemon on a real copy. The game contains the first 3 generations of Pokemon, which is 386 in total. I know that Gen 2 and 3 technically aren't original, but for the sake of the video, I'm just going to say that everything before Diamond and Pearl is original. Now before I start, there are some things I need to point out. First of all, we're gonna have to assume that to catch every single shiny Pokemon, we have all the copies of the original Game Boy games. That would be Leaf Green, Fire Red, Emerald, Ruby, and Sapphire. The reason for this is because some Pokemon exist in certain games, so to catch all 386, you'd need all 5 copies. Second of all, although all Pokemon have the same chance of being shiny, some Pokemon are harder to find and catch than others. For example, if you find 8,192 Pidgeys and 8,192 Chanseys, you should technically end up with 1 shiny Pidgey and 1 shiny Chansey. However, the chance of finding a Pidgey in the wild is 45%, while the chance of finding a Chansey in the wild is 2%. This makes finding a shiny Chansey much more difficult than finding a shiny Pidgey. Finding out the exact amount of time it would take to obtain every single shiny Pokemon would be next to impossible since the chances of encountering different Pokemon varies, but we could still find the minimum amount of time it would take. Finally, I want to point out that in reality, the amount of time it would take would be a lot more than just the theoretical minimum. This is because I'd have to factor in stuff like trading the different copies, going to different locations, and a lot more outside of just looking for Pokemon. Also, if you're lucky, it could even be a lot less. Technically, you could have a playthrough where every single Pokemon you run into is shiny, but you have a better chance of winning the Powerball jackpot than encountering just 3 shiny Pokemon in a row. Now that we got that covered, we can begin. There are 4 ways of getting a shiny Pokemon. The first and easiest method is just finding one in the wild. You can find shiny Pokemon in tall grass, caves, or water at any point in the game, and as long as you can catch it, it's all yours. The second method is turning the game off and on again, or in other words, soft resetting. Sometimes in the games, you can encounter or get a Pokemon from someone. If it isn't shiny, you could just reset the game and keep trying until you finally get a shiny one. The third method is hatching an egg. You can breed 2 Pokemon together to get an egg, and when it hatches, there's a chance that it could be shiny. However, this takes forever and should only be done if there's no other way to get the Pokemon that you want. Finally, the last method is just straight up cheating and getting every single shiny Pokemon using the Game Shark, which I highly recommend doing so you don't waste your time. But for now we're just talking about getting them legitimately. Let's start with the wild Pokemon. The amount of Pokemon that could be caught in the wild without any soft resetting is 297, so theoretically it would take 2,433,024 encounters to find every single shiny wild Pokemon. Assuming you aren't stupid enough to accidentally kill it like me and have to re-find it. On average, finding a Pokemon, running away, and finding a new one takes about 15 seconds, so in total it would take 422 days, 9 hours, and 36 minutes. Next come the eggs. Like I mentioned, hatching a shiny Pokemon in the old games is really inefficient. You have to keep riding a bike in a straight line hundreds of thousands of times to the point where you'd rather play Big Smoke's train mission.
Take the high road on the right, DJ!
In fact, in some cases like when you get starter Pokemon, you're better off restarting the whole game and soft resetting than trying to hatch an egg with a shiny Pokemon. Because of this, you should only hatch eggs if you really have to. There are 15 Pokemon that have to be obtained through hatching an egg, and you can hold 5 in your inventory for hatching. On average, it takes about 3 minutes and 10 seconds to hatch an egg. Therefore, it would take around 54 days, 1 hour, and 4 minutes just to get those 15 Pokemon. Finally come the soft resets. There are 71 Pokemon that you could soft reset for. These Pokemon could be legendaries or Pokemon that other characters in the game give you. 20 of the 71 could be soft reset and caught in a single playthrough, which would take around 28 days, 10 hours, and 37 minutes. Hope you guys are ready, cause here's where stuff gets complicated. In Pokemon games, you're often offered a choice when someone gives you a Pokemon where you can only choose one option. For example, in the beginning of the game, you're given the choice between 3 starter Pokemon and you can only pick one. If you want the other 2 Pokemon, you'd have to trade your Pokemon to another game, restart it, and then play the game again. I did the math to try to figure out how many times they'd have to restart the game, what Pokemon they'd need to get in a playthrough, how long it would take to soft reset and find the shiny, and how long it would take to play through the game to get to the point where you get the Pokemon that you need. If I lost you at this point, don't worry, I don't blame you, just bear with me. For Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, it would take 9 whole restarts to get the required Pokemon. After factoring in all the soft resets and the required time it would take to play through the game 9 times, it would take a whole 49 days, 15 hours, and 35 minutes. As for Fire Red and Leaf Green, it would also take 9 restarts to get every shiny, which in total would be 39 days, 8 hours, and 11 minutes. There's also 3 Pokemon that can't really be found shiny in the English versions, so you'd need to cheat them in. No big deal. With this information, we can finally figure out the total. It would take at least 1 year, 228 days, 21 hours, and 3 minutes of non-stop playing to obtain every single shiny Pokemon in the game, so it's basically impossible and a complete waste of time. But then again, this is coming from the guy who just calculated a useless statistic in a 10-year-old game, so you go do your thing.